Benedict, how serious has Gamblegate been for the Conservatives? The fact that they seem to be losing ground in the polls, is that directly linked, in your view, to Gamblegate?
I think it's not helping. Certainly, I don't think it would be that serious if they weren't already in a bit of a tailspin, ultimately. I think the way that they've handled the entirety of the campaign has really focused the attention of members of the public on how badly they're performing. I think D-Day wasn't, the D-Day's memorial was not a particularly edifying moment. This has, in some ways, been a blessing for Rishi Sunak in that it now focuses the attention on other members of his party rather than simply him. But it is now the case that the public are focusing on the fact that, not only are the Conservatives not necessarily offering any policies that I don't particularly like, their campaign is not doing very well, and some of them are not behaving particularly well. And it's one of those things where, if this had perhaps happened in isolation, it might not be quite so fatal. But in many ways, because it is already part of a fatal campaign, it's just twisting the knife in that little bit more. People who were sort of sat there thinking, well, no, I don't really have any other options other than I'm not, convinced by reform, or I'm not going to vote Labour, might have still stuck it out with the Conservatives. But now you can see actually the polls are edging down even more, and people are just thinking, do you know what? I've had enough of the pack of these people, because it's not just the Prime Minister, it's not just a few isolated people. As more and more names come out, it just gives the impression that people, when they knew when the election was going to happen, rather than think, right, back to our constituencies, back to sort of batten down the hatches and put in a hard shift, they decided, I need a dopamine hit. And I don't think people really respect that.
Tessa, Benedict refers there to a tailspin, referring to the Conservatives. Do you see a linkage between the apparently deteriorating performance and Gamblegate? How seriously do you rate Gamblegate?
I think it's deeply problematic because there is a breakdown in trust. And the more names that come out, and Rishi's failure to act immediately really and distance himself from it. He was clearly angry and upset. It was one of the leadership debates, and I actually felt sorry for him. I could know his eyes sitting, feeling sorry for the Prime Minister, which is never a good thing, is it, really, to be taking pity on an individual that is asking you to re-elect him as leader. But actually, he should have got rid of them and made that decisive and clear from day one, I think, even if there's any smear around their names, any question, even if in our justice system you're innocent until proven guilty.
I know, and by the way, this rather troubles me that we are beginning to have a new rule for those in public life. So normally, as you say, you're guilty and you're innocent until proven guilty. But in public life, apparently, the tiniest suspicion over your name and people advocate that you should be suspended. And if you're not suspended, that's a sign of weakness by your leader.
No, I think, but it's special circumstances because we're on the clock ticking down to the 4th of July. And actually, it looked like that we may not have a decision for the Gambling Commission, and therefore it was up to Rishi to take leadership and say, look, I cannot expect the public to make a decision about an individual with a cloud hanging over his name or her name, and therefore they can come back and we'll get them into a by-election, etc. in the future. But at the moment, while there's a question mark, I think it's only right that they suspend their campaign. That's what I would have done. But I think more broadly, this is about individuals with questionable morality inveigling their way into the inner circle of government. So the lack of judgment, the lack of instinct about individuals with integrity, I think I know you wouldn't do that, Michael Portillo. And I think you would hope those around you, surrounding you in number 10, privy to the most important decision you're about to announce in the pouring rain, weren't going to be the sort of people who'd slop down to Ladbrokes. And that's the problem. Those individuals are rotters, and they were in number 10.
I wonder whether one of the reasons that Wes Streeting and the Labour Party say they don't trust the polls is that actually the prospect of having nearly 500 MPs is pretty horrifying for Labour. And I'll tell you why. Because they don't know who these people are. And if you're talking about rotters coming into politics, that's your phrase, Tessa, but let's run with it for a moment. If you're talking about rotters coming into politics, I mean, a party does its best to vet the 350 people that it hopes might get elected. But when you're talking about 100 or 150 more than that, how on earth do you know who's being swept in?
Oh, you're completely right. This is something that is going to bite the Labour Party at some point. I'm not saying that it'll be a particularly large number. It might only be a very small number, but inevitably people will slip through the net who will not behave appropriately once they're in Parliament, or it will be discovered that they have some skeletons in the closet. It has to be said, one of the most dispiriting things I've found about this entire process is watching in real time the selection process, both for the Labour Party but also mainly for the Conservatives. The slapdash nature in which it's been done. You wouldn't expect a bank or a football team to recruit like we do politicians, the people who run the country. But it's done on the hoof, and it's done based on party loyalty and how you're doing it at a sort of a local level. It's not even particularly done to do with competence in that role. And I think people have seen that and thought, I'm not happy with how this has gone.
Tessa, someone asked me about 1997 a moment ago. In 1997, the song was "Things Can Only Get Better." There was a certain amount of optimism about the future. Do you have much optimism about the future? I mean, Keir Starmer may win with a landslide majority, but where is the optimism? Do we, for instance, on this point that Benedict's raising, do we think that politics is going to be cleaner? Do we have any hope of that?
I think you're right. We have two technocrats slugging it out. I wouldn't be surprised tonight, Michael, if this is your highest viewing figures ever, because they're not pulling power, are they? Rishi and Keir, let's face it, they're a great big turn-off. Okay, and Keir Starmer, I think we're also realistic about the landscape. Whether you're ideologically opposed or for Brexit, it clobbered our economy. All the stats are demonstrating that. Line in the sand, neither men want to shift there. We know that COVID tipped us into debt, unprecedented levels and higher taxation, and I don't see either party taking us out of that. So while we think, OK, we don't want sleaze, we want a fresh face, we want to give Keir Starmer a go, there's no spring in the step. There's no big L, as they called it back in 1997. I was a kid back then, and I've got to say, I hadn't registered my vote. I was so young and chaotic. I wasn't even organised enough to vote you out, Michael, but I think others did it for me.
Other views on Brexit are available. Benedict, not much optimism.
In the short term, no. Realistically, that's certainly not for this election, and actually I think the next 5 years there's going to be a lot of internal wrangling within the Conservative Party as to, as much as anything else, there's going to be real shortness in terms of who might actually want to be leader.
I don't think we've got our heads around this. I mean, if the Conservatives down to 60, we're not going to be terribly concerned about the Conservative Party anymore. We're still in that frame of mind because they're the government.
I disagree. I don't think there's a lot of talk about how this is going to be a wipeout event for the Conservatives. I don't think that an institution that is that heavily invested in the political fabric of this country will just disappear. And ultimately, I don't think the replacement reform has enough behind it to stay the course. Yeah. So my bet, 10 years' time, I would say the Tories will still be the major party of the right, not reform.
Well, I'll be sitting here in 10 years' time and we'll talk about it then.